My name is Colin Wulff, the Assistant Director of Religious Education at the Fourth Universalist Society in New York City, a non-creedal Unitarian Universalist community welcome to all. I'm here to introduce one of our new offerings in our adult education lineup for 2020 and 2021. We are committed to creating an expansive online ecosystem of educational content and conversation. This series is called Voluble Minds, famous philosophical dialogues abbreviated, read aloud, and reflected on in video format as primers for some of the most challenging and influential ideas in philosophical history. This first series will be focused on the Platonic Western tradition. Replete with politics and religion, many of these dialogues may challenge certain conventions of deeming topics fit for polite conversation. Historian Stephen Greenblatt, in his book The Swerve, chronicling the rediscovery of Lucretius' polarizing and enduring poem De Rerum Natura, reminds us that our image of the tortured, solitary genius is not one that would have resonated with the Attic masters to whom we attribute the beginning of this dialogic tradition in Western thought. Often, brain-bending hang-ups were worked out in the classroom or in the public forum through debate, in which the point, if ostensibly to defend a foregone thesis, could nonetheless give way to a process of mutual discovery, of thinking aloud. Some of these dialogues then are literary interpretations, if not accurate transcriptions, of conversations suggested to have actually taken place in some form. However, for the most part, they do tendentiously express the author's point of view in a common preceptor-pupil formula in which the student is soundly schooled in their misapprehensions and buckles under the forceful and ultimately unassailable case made by the author's mouthpiece. Of course, many conclusions arrived at in these works are readily assailable, and we encourage that critical engagement from our viewers. One would hope we've learned something in the intervening centuries, which of course raises the question of why we should exhume these works at all. Why do a series on these dialogues? Dialogues, though not employed by every great thinker, are a tradition spanning many centuries and intellectual movements. Where thinkers who did not use this format are implicated by those we have included, we'll try to provide the necessary context and connective tissue in our introductory segments accompanying each video. All in all, a fairly exhaustive compendium of topics and opinions will be touched on in our first 10 philosopher season. As noted earlier, the didactic formula most of these dialogues adopts should not necessarily be emulated in real life between peers, even if it could be as smoothly as shown. But what of the spirit of the dialogue can be distilled to some relevance today? Though I'm not as romantic about the problem-solving power of dialogue as I once was, I refuse to count it out. Many of us now have an understandable learned aversion to phrases such as both sides, which too handily neutralize differences of epistemology and intent that are more than trivial matters of taste. Dialogue takes two willing contributors at least, and as we will absolutely see in some of our episodes, even a willingness to engage in it is no guarantee of goodwill or mutual understanding. Rhetorical tactics, limited accountability for fallacy or gaps in perspective, and confirmation bias will abound in what lies ahead. But we are selecting and presenting these dialogues with the belief that even at their most problematic, they will be instructive. If we have reached a socio-political kairos in which dialogue is at or nearing the end of its practical tether, that is nonetheless a symptom in itself, one we would do well to consider. The promotion of rich, complicated, open conversation is an important element of our educational mandate. I believe that, above all, it is the job of a non-creedal community not to transmit particular beliefs, but rather to further the informational, intuitive, mechanistic, humanistic tools whereby we might both independently and collectively arrive at and live them out. Because however dysfunctional in practice, debate and conversation are the ways in which our quality of life is legislated. They're how relationships are begun and maintained, ended too. But just as often it is the absence of dialogue that hastens misunderstanding and resentment. One can't force fair and equitable participation from anyone else in dialogue. But if, as is not unreasonable to maintain, we have gotten very bad at it as a society, that does not seem to me as much an argument for abandoning the practice as getting better at it. The burden for setting that example will never be completely level. We spend what energy and faculties we have on the quests by which we feel most called. But gaining comfortability with alien ideas, or perhaps just as importantly, gaining discomfort with too familiar ideas through a rigorous process in itself, should ultimately make undertaking our larger projects necessarily in a shared world with other humans easier. That is anyway the end to which this series tends. We will strive for this by offering a twofold course. Firstly, in the form of the dialogue, a human demonstration of its exercise, a display of the techniques and fashions of rhetoric, including some unsavory ones, and the process of affirming and contesting things subjective and objective. The other is a historical survey of the ideas themselves. On that latter aim, our approach to these thinkers will not be celebratory so much as a critical look at the opinions and notions they developed and traded, which, for better and worse, are embedded in our social and political structures, including the ambitious, incomplete, flawed, and living documents on which this nation was founded. These dialogues will touch on some of the earliest instances of many of our sustained and lived disagreements regarding the nature of facts, facts of nature, the definition and scope of God, the separation of church and state, the appropriate size and intervening powers of government, the limits of human perception and imagination, and how to go about identifying and codifying morality. Terms change. Translations filter meaning, prepositions and syntax, orthodoxies and means of transmitting ideas metamorphose, but we recapitulate more assumptions, queries, and provisional solutions than we might realize. Now to formal cause, the shape this series will take. There's no perfect substitute for reading these pieces in their entirety on your own time for a more comprehensive understanding of the ideas therein, but we hope we will help isolate some focal takeaways and provide a visual and auditory aid to distinguishing between these pieces. That said, it would be disingenuous of me to pretend that you are certain to find all these works in their original uncut form equally edifying. These thinkers are varied enough in expression that there is no question some of them are more repetitive and inefficient per major idea than others, without necessarily compensating for it in elegance of style. By all means, may this resource help you to navigate those cases at your discretion, so long as we are all clear about the possible pitfalls of using this series as more than a supplement or primer. It's not here to make you overnight experts, or indeed experts at all. Each section will open with a prefatory video address like this one. Our 10 units in Series 1 are divided by philosopher, by whom we may have included anywhere from 1 to 5 dialogues. The first video of each unit will introduce both the philosopher and the dialogue to which it is appended, and subsequent videos in the same unit, featuring a different dialogue but the same philosopher, will just introduce the dialogue of the given episode. I will post a timestamp with each episode in case you'd rather jump straight to the reading. As for the dialogues themselves, I will be splitting them with a host of wonderful guest readers, and we will be reading remotely using online video applications, mainly Zoom, for our recording. Maybe this is not how we would have done this in non-pandemic times, but I think it may, by happy accident, serve either to accentuate the age of a given dialogue or offer it a chance to demonstrate that it has transcended its own time. I'll leave you to be the judge of that. One thing to make clear, these are not to be performances or reenactments, strictly speaking. I am a professional theater artist, and admittedly, part of my desire to develop this project was to explore the ways in which the form of philosophical dialogue subdivides that space between tractates, essays, or manifestos, and performable dramatic literature. But it is not my intent to try to force these works into something more closely resembling pure entertainment than suits them. My aim is not to dramatize or imitate how I think Socrates might have declaimed by affecting a classical posture. No togas, no attempts to induce any catharses. It is my hope that some of the sensibilities with which I and many of my guest readers have performed Shakespeare and Greek theater will be relevant here, and that crisp phrasing and clarity of inflection, as well as a critical mass of human expression, may conduce to rendering this a valuable tool for learning. By our more personal format, we hope to emphasize that these thinkers were all human beings, flawed ones, a redundancy that still seems to want stressing. I am endeavoring no dogmatic revival of any of the beliefs herein, but scrutinizing these ideas and their proponents begins with acknowledging and understanding them. Indeed, I have it on authority no less illustrious than that of the French father of the essay himself, Montaigne, that we should be wary of arguments from authority. If you wonder at the impossibility of following this advice, given the authoritative source, perhaps I can help. Take it from me, and you do not take it from any authority. I'm not an accredited scholar of theology or philosophy. I have a BA in theater from Oberlin College. While theater is indeed connected to the philosophical and ritual tradition in many fascinating and practical ways, and though, as stated, I plan for those skills to aid in my delivery of these dialogues, I think it is important that I emphasize my own relationship to this material is in the same category we aim to build and facilitate with this series, that of the self-guided enthusiast. Though I am perhaps one whose combination of jobs and personal interests has positioned him well to welcome others into that, I hope, very accessible circle without too much fear of misleading them as to the ideas and history that comprise it. Though I endeavor to be a strenuously honest and fair source, know that I am an expert one. Think critically, check everyone's work, even Montaigne's. On that circumspect note, each video will include a written form of the following disclaimer. This is an educational, non-commercial resource. The views expressed in these dialogic excerpts do not necessarily reflect those of its readers, the Fourth Universalist Society, or any of its staff or membership. The sources from which they are drawn are in the public domain and/or used with permission of the translator. In reading, I will be giving voice to quite a lot of material that directly admonishes my own beliefs, committing myself to its expression in reading and explanation, both, I hope, more fully and fairly than some of these thinkers do in speaking to beliefs to which they are hostile. With the exception of very few edits that cauterize necessary textual cuts and smooth out translational confusions into a retention of sense, these selections are taken in the words of their authors. My personal point of view will not, however, be entirely divorceable from the introductory segments and a handful of post-dialogue reflective ones. Better to admit that now than to claim airtight impartiality and constantly go back on it. I will be pointing out where it seems to me these thinkers have made especially good sense and where I think they have not. Those opinions are entirely my own, again, not necessarily those of my employers or of the Fourth U community. In the interest of full transparency, where my own beliefs are concerned, my approach to the series would probably be best described as that of an imaginative secularist and compassionate skeptic. But I will prioritize an honest conveyance of the views of our series subjects. So thank you for tuning in. Some philosophers use this dialogic practice more abundantly or well than others. We will start with, in Western terms, the original, a set of Platonic dialogues featuring the Socratic method, and move forward in rough chronological order, eventually taking us up to the mid-20th century at our close of this first string of units. Without further ado, I'm glad to have you joining us on this adventure. Sometimes to speak is to act, and a conversation is a happening. We will not idealize the practice, but will without apology celebrate the aspiration of rich, open, meaningful dialogue in the interests of knowledge, discovery, critical thought, shared understanding, community, and human progress. Welcome to Voluble Minds. I hope you enjoy.